Hello everybody, welcome to this presentation which has been sponsored by Spexor. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the wall thickness of your work and how you achieve and maintain a uniform wall thickness throughout, especially in larger pieces. There are multiple calipers on the market, so I'm just going to show you some of those that are available. Today I'd like to talk to you about how we maintain the wall thickness in our work and how we keep it uniformed, which can be very important if we're using green wood where we have to get it to a particular wall thickness, not to run the risk of cracking, distortion. We try to minimize that. So just let me show you some pieces of my work where this is relevant. When we create hollow forms, we always aim to try and maintain a uniform wall thickness throughout in the piece. It helps with how the piece feels weight-wise and also for the structural integrity of the piece. If it's turned with unseasoned timber and the wall thickness is too heavy, it may split, distort, and we run the risk of losing all our hard work. So maintaining that wall thickness is really important, and when you have a piece like this, trying to maintain that wall thickness here can be a little bit more difficult. You will get your calipers in there, but it can be a little bit more difficult. So just let me show you another piece. Here we have another example of that where we have the top area here with the high shoulder, and then also to get our calipers to come down here. Again, just another example of difficulties that we face sometimes in getting our calipers into the right places. Here it's just a simple vase, but we do have the large opening which we can get down into it with our calipers, but again the height and the depth of this makes it a little bit more difficult as well. Once we go past the limits of our calipers, we are now into uncharted territory, and we need to maintain that wall thickness throughout. The same would go for smaller hollow forms such as this, which have a small opening, and just we want to keep a piece like this nicely balanced. We do not want to have something like this really heavy. It just, once that's picked up, it won't feel right in your hands, and you just want to have a pleasing, nice balanced weight, and you do that by maintaining the wall thickness as we just said. Also, here's another little hollow form, which the shape is a little bit different than the traditional hollow forms, but again, achieving the wall thickness down along here and getting down there and getting access to it. Again, it can be something a little bit more difficult, and we're going to just show you methods around that now in a moment. So for some of my work where I aim for the very thin walls, such as my erosion series, this piece is about 2 millimeters in wall thickness. I just find it can be very difficult. If I was to drill holes in this to use that as a gauge, it already dictates the pattern that I must lay out on this, and it doesn't always suit. So hence why I don't use that method. It works really well for some people, but I like to just map it out, and if I change the design, it's not dictated to me by holes that I have drilled in it already. So I find the Spexor system works really well for this kind of work for me. And here's another piece. Again, it's almost a traditional shape hollow form with a high shoulder, with a small opening, and again, because I was unsure of the pattern, I wouldn't have drilled the holes, but the system I'm using allows me to get down here on the sides. Okay. So here we have a larger hollow form. Now this one was never the intention to drill holes in it or pierce it, so hence why that method would not have worked on this piece. So I just gauged the wall thickness with the Spexor system on this, and it worked really well. So the other thing to consider is large platters, bowls, plates, whatever you want to turn. When we're gauging our wall thickness, our calipers maybe only reach in so far, and we would like to keep that uniform throughout the piece, because again, when we lift these pieces up, we want them to feel right. If they're functional, they need to be on that correct wall thickness to make it a tactile, functional item, that you know the integrity of the wood is there as well. So there are numerous calipers and some very good quality calipers on the market. So this is the one that I would use a lot. I just simply set my depth here to the correct wall thickness on the piece, and then I can just lock in that here and it works really well. So this is another type of calipers which I would have used over the years. This is what I would call a ratio calipers. Because it's not exactly in the center, whatever the dimension here is gauged by some corresponding marks up here. So there's a little bit of need to know the understanding of what size here isn't exactly the same up here. But again, they work really well. So with my wood turning developing over the years, I wanted to make some larger hollow forms. So the calipers that I had were soon exhausted once I went above the 6 to 8 inches, 200 mil, that type of size. So I created these calipers based on the previous that I just showed you on the same design, and it worked okay, but I just always found it to be a little bit cumbersome, and I always ran the risk of maybe damaging the rim if I let it slip and I wasn't careful, especially on a rather thin wall piece, on large pieces. So, but again, it did the job for me for many years. So as I mentioned, the previous calipers were ratio calipers. So here we have what I would call 50-50. So whatever happens here, it should be equal on this end, and that just gives a representation. Now these are a rather large calipers, but it will only do a hollow form or a vessel of this size. It may look rather large, but it's what's here has to replicate the other side, and again they will do the job really well if this is what you're used to. So as I mentioned on my erosion series, I like to turn the pieces rather thin. I now aim for about 2.5 millimeters. It gives me an area for the piercing and the pyro carving, as I call it, on the work that I do. If I go much thinner, which I can achieve with this device, the Spexor device, I tend to burn away with the pyrography unit, so I have to find that happy medium, and around 2.5 millimeters works well for me. It's not hard pierce, and it's also good for the pyrography. So what I do is sometimes I will turn, just for practice, is maybe a small bowl. And using the Spexor then I can gauge the wall thickness, but I'm also monitoring the wood using the tools and listening to how the chisels operate, and it's just, I find it good practice, especially if I'm going to intend to do a large piece like this that maybe have 200 hours work in it. So it pays to do a little bit of practice and even a little bit of research if it's a piece of wood that you've received. So just let me show you how the Spexor works on this particular piece. Here we have the unit itself, and basically we have one cable coming out, we have the probe, and we have this little ball bearing which is magnetized here at the top of the probe. The unit itself is powered by a USB cable which is plugged into the adapter, and as you can see it'll just start up, and what we have here is the majority of times it will zero out, but we just have a reset button here. Okay, so it's good just to do that at the start. So the depth of thickness that this tool will work with is up to 20 millimeters. So if I just keep moving that away, you can see where it's changing. Now it is giving me a reading there, and you can see that it's fluctuating out of range. So if I bring it back in, we have 20.5. Now also remember, there's nothing here, there's no wood. It will lose some of that magnetism at that 20, over 20. So if your piece is rather thick at that point, remember just to take that into consideration. So if we just take this little bowl here, as with any piece, when we start at the rim, we will establish our wall thickness, and we would either check with our calipers and vernier calipers maybe, and get the correct wall thickness that we desire, and then we can just get our reading here. So I just let the bearing slip over, and if I just show you this first, and then we'll have a look at the reading. So I can bring that all the way down. So because this unit here is not metal, no sharp corners, it won't scratch the outside of your piece, and the bearing won't damage the bowl. So if we look here at the rim, we have, you can see it's fluctuating slightly. So if I just tilt this, if you see me just tilting this, you will see how accurate this actually is. So just by moving it away that little bit slightly. So what I have here on this particular little bowl is approximately 1.2, 1.5 millimeters. So if we just progress down along the piece, we can see, and it's good just to stop, let it calibrate. So we've 1.7. So we've 0.2 of a millimeter of a difference there. And if I just move down a little bit further, we can see here where it is just 1 millimeter. Okay, so we have about half a millimeter from the top to the center. And if I move it down and allow it to get flat, so we're back to our millimeter. And if I go to the very bottom, where we often tend to leave that little bit of weight there, and if I get it flat on, we're back to 1.35 millimeters. So you can see it's really accurate. So this piece is obviously way out. We're half a millimeter thinner in the middle than we are at the top and the bottom. I don't know how I can live with that on this piece, but we'll see. So that is basically how this tool will work. As I mentioned, there's a huge variety of devices on the market, hollowing systems with lasers and cameras, and you get your monitors and all kinds of attachments to help you create the perfect piece. And even now people have moved into a green screen where it shows up on your computer, and all works great. It's what system works best for you. But when I'm doing my large holoforms with my camera system, I find that the bar which projects across the top tends to vibrate sometimes. And then when I notice on the screen, I'm getting a very shuddered image. And my concern is that the camera may move a little with that vibration. And when I'm going for a very thin wall piece, I have to be very sure that that is correct all the way down. Because if it's a large piece, maybe 2 millimeters, it's very easy to go out through the side wall of it, and I don't want to do that. But if I'm doing it freehand, and I'm not setting up cameras and one thing and another, any other attachments, quite simply, I do my hollowing in stages, and then I can just introduce the Spexor and just keep a guide, keep control of the wall thickness down along. And it's especially in very deep vessels that it will just, once it can maintain the contact with the ball bearing, 20 millimeters as I said, it's a really good system. So as technology is taking further and further advancements into the wood turning, this is just another item for you to consider. So thank you very much for watching.